In this video, we're going to take you behind the scenes of a recent film shoot at a brewery to show you how we light interviews. So the first thing we do whenever we begin a shoot is we evaluate the space that we're working in. So in this particular space, we realized that we wanted to get the taps in the background, but we also knew that we would be shooting into window light that would be harder to control. We metered out the windows, we tried to figure out what level of light we would need to bring the space up to in order to set exposure for the windows. There were a bunch of interior lights that they had on, and we decided to bring those down, both so that we could control the light better and so that they weren't creating noise in the audio track. The next thing we needed to do was set up our key light. The Godox VL150 is a daylight balanced light source, which matches great with the window lighting that we have in the background, and we made sure then to set our camera white balance to daylight. After setting that light up, I also put a softbox on it, which will really broaden the light source and create a nice flattering soft light on the subject. We also experimented with a honeycomb filter, which goes over top of the softbox and helps to control spill, making the light more directional. But one downside of the honeycomb is it does cut some of the exposure levels on the light. So after getting it up and testing it out, we realized that it was more important for us to have a brighter light source, and so we actually pulled the honeycomb filter off. So after we got our key set up, we walked it in as close as possible without getting into the frame. We had Dustin sit in so that we could gauge the exposure on the subject. We were filming on a Canon C70 with a 50mm lens, and we determined pretty quickly that we wanted to shoot at f2.8. And when we set the camera to f2.8, we realized that we were getting too much light in from the background. So we applied some ND to bring that down and make sure that we weren't clipping highlights. Now, on a bigger crew, we could have maybe put some ND over those windows in order to bring those down in exposure, but given the resources that we had on a two-person shoot, this was the best solution that we could come up with for this particular interview. When you're lighting an interview, it's really important that your subject is separated from your background. So in this case, the bright windows in the background were not a huge issue for us, given the distance that the subject was sitting from the windows and the fact that the windows were providing some nice rim lighting on the fill side of the shoulder, which helped separate the subject from the background more. It's important to consider contrast ratio when you're lighting an interview. You definitely don't want an even exposure between the key side and the fill side of the face, as this will cause your features to become really flattened and kill the depth of the frame. But you also don't want too much contrast ratio between the key side and the fill side. So you have to kind of gauge what is appropriate for the intended use of the video, and then choose a contrast ratio that matches that style. In this particular case, we were lighting this interview for a marketing piece for a brewery. So a little bit of contrast was helpful to create a little bit of mood, but we didn't want to have so much contrast that we were losing the details and definition of the character. So we noticed that there was a big difference between the fill side of the face and the key side of the face. So we metered this to just kind of verify what we were seeing with our eyes, and we noticed that there was about a 2.5 stop difference between key and fill. We also used false color to verify this. So false color is a digital meter that will show you differences in exposure values throughout an image. It allows you to understand what parts of your image are darker and brighter and the difference between those two values. We decided that we wanted to add a little bit more lighting on the fill side of the face. It wasn't enough of a difference for us to use a second light source, so instead we used a bounce on a C-stand to sort of reflect some of that key light back on the fill side of the face and bring that contrast ratio closer together. So in the end, we ended up with a contrast ratio that was 1.5 stops. And we moved forward with this as our final interview frame. So I hope you enjoyed going behind the scenes at our recent film shoot, and you learned a little bit about how we light interviews. If you want to check out the end product of this, look for the Old Thunder video on our YouTube page. Thanks for watching.